The Arcade, an iconic shopping promenade deeply rooted in the urban fabric of Paris. To understand the Arcade, we must first understand the city. Paris grew out of the Seine, which divides the city into two banks. The southern bank houses governmental institutions, while the northern is where most of the city's banks and businesses are concentrated. The medieval wall contained the city and forced it to grow inwards, creating a dense urban fabric with narrow streets and alleys, which are still present today. The 19th century brought upon the Industrial Revolution and an emergence of the middle class. The commercial districts of Paris gained affluence, drawing entrepreneurs and developers to the area. While the attitudes of society had changed, the streets remained dirty, narrow, noisy, and unsafe. With an increasing demand for consumer goods and looking to counter the unpleasant qualities of the street, landowners looked to develop a new type of real estate. In 1799, an American by the name of James Thayer purchased the former site of a hotel and commissioned 2 landscape panoramas. To promote the new attractions, he built a covered passageway with retail storefronts opening onto the block's alleyways. The Passage de Panorama was a huge success, and it led to the construction of many others. The success and appeal of the Arcade quickly became apparent to investors, and in the first half of the 1800s, they became a popular architectural typology, springing up all over Paris. Here's a typical block of Paris. A ring of mid-rise residential buildings surrounds the informal cluster of shops, houses, and courtyards, connected through the narrow alleyways. Acquiring the block, retail investors would insert a formal corridor and build an arcade, which would frame the wooden facades of all the shops in a consistent rhythm. Delicate marble tiling would then be installed and the iconic roof built, enclosing the promenade. The fact that these arcades were privately owned public space created a greater investment in the quality of the environment. The threshold invites pedestrians in while filtering out all undesirable aspects of the street. Instead of the shops plugging into a narrow sidewalk, the storefronts connect to an elegant passage. The passage created a change in stride. Visitors would not be rushed by the busy street life, and the shop owners were able to curate merchandise for the passerby. In each of the arcades, the shops are tightly packed on the ground floor to maximize the number of units and thus profits. They are all relatively uniform in size, about 15 meters, and optimized their frontage by being mostly glazed. The back of each shop was restricted by the extent of the neighboring building, so shopkeepers were forced to improvise by expanding upwards. The arcade width varies between 3 to 4 meters. It is wide enough to accommodate both the customer and the traveler, but also narrow and straight enough to suggest a clear passageway. The entrance to the arcade is clearly distinguished from the rest of the building's facade with a grand threshold. The arcade is evidently a privately owned space with operating hours and private security. The glass and iron roof above are a distinguishing feature, raised from its surroundings and allowing ample daylight to enter. The shops are shallow and filled with merchandise on display. The arcade can be used as a pedestrian shortcut between streets. Compared to the arcade, the street is noisy, dirty, and hectic. Often arcades would be built close to one another, forming a network of passages interrupted by streets. The steps leading into the arcade mark a slower pace from that of the street. This change of pace allows the visitor to appreciate the luxurious ornamentation and the grand scale of the glass ceiling. The diversity and products sold at the arcade is extensive. There's everything from a perfume shop to a cafe, as well as a store selling the latest fashions, a bakery and toy store. The shop displays animate the rhythm of the colonnade. Similarly, the spaces are filled with a collection of Parisians, casual shoppers, business people, the bourgeoisie, shopkeepers, vagrants, and even gamblers and prostitutes. The central rotunda becomes a focal point, suggesting a meeting space and allowing storefronts to spill into the passage. The passages are a peaceful form of the crowd. It controls itself better there. It stretches out. It warms itself up by rubbing against the walls. The pace of the pedestrians no longer slows down humbly, winding around the line of cars like ivy on oak trees. They no longer wade through the mud or the elements. The passage shelters them and envelops them in an almost domestic gentleness. It is a street that gathers itself together, or an interior that constantly undoes itself. The arcade is a redefinition of a street. It distills the storefronts from the avenues and regenerates them into a designed space. The marble floor replaces the rough cobblestone streets. The glass roof replaces awnings. The flaneur replaces the pedestrian. The arcade gave rise to a character, the flaneur. Walter Benjamin describes him as the observer of the marketplace, as the man of leisure, the idler, the urban explorer, the connoisseur of the street. As the middle class emerged in society, the Parisian cityscape became a fascinating theatrical display. The arcade became the place for people to see and to be seen. It was architecture committed to the retail experience. The arcade was gradually phased out by the department store. However, the major blow to arcades was dealt by a large-scale intervention. Commissioned by Napoleon, Haussmann carved grand axes across Paris. Most of the arcades were destroyed during the renovations, and others closed due to the restructure of the city. Of the 140 or so covered passages that were built, only 20 remain today. The surviving arcades are still successful public spaces. Even 200 years after their conception, they provide an oasis from the busy Paris street life.